The Big Trail 1930. When The Big Trail premiered in 1930, it was meant to revolutionize cinema. Studio executives believed they had a masterpiece in their hands, an epic western that would blow audiences away with its scope, innovation, and raw authenticity. Directed by Raoul Walsh and introducing a fresh-faced 23-year-old named John Wayne, the film set out to tell the story of America's westward expansion like never before. This wasn't a studio backlit shoot. This was filmed across 5 states, with real wagons, real rivers, and real danger. It was cinema on a grand scale, and The Big Trail was its boldest frontier. But ambition came at a cost. Shot in Fox grandeur, a cutting-edge widescreen format, the film looked breathtaking, if you were lucky enough to find a theater that could show it properly. The problem was, most theaters weren't equipped for the technology. What was supposed to be a stunning visual experience was chopped down and flattened for standard screens, robbing it of its cinematic punch. Audiences didn't see a revolution. They saw a slow-moving, oddly framed film that didn't match the hype. Critics were unimpressed. The film's deliberate pacing, minimal dialogue, and emphasis on atmosphere confused viewers who were used to snappier, dialogue-heavy films. Instead of celebrating its realism and vision, reviewers dismissed it as dull and overly long. The film flopped at the box office, and John Wayne's big break quickly faded into near obscurity. He spent nearly a decade in low-budget westerns before finally finding fame with Stagecoach in 1939. In hindsight, The Big Trail was simply too far ahead of its time. Today, film historians admire it for its technical ambition and gritty realism. It laid the groundwork for many westerns that came later, but in its own era, it was a beautiful misfire. A classic example of how even the most promising films can stumble when audiences and technology aren't quite ready. What was meant to be the trailblazer of a new cinematic frontier instead became one of Hollywood's most spectacular early flops. Duel in the Sun, 1946. When Duel in the Sun arrived in theaters in 1946, it had all the markings of a legendary Hollywood triumph. Produced by David O. Selznick, the same man behind Gone with the Wind, this Technicolor Western was meant to be an emotional, erotic, and cinematic explosion. With a sprawling cast that included Jennifer Jones, Gregory Peck, and Joseph Cotten, and a budget that soared beyond most films of its time, Selznick wasn't just making a movie. He was crafting an event. He even dubbed it Lust in the Dust, confident it would be both shocking and unforgettable. And it was unforgettable, but not in the way he'd hoped. The film told the story of Pearl Chavez, a mixed-race woman sent to live with distant white relatives, caught in a dangerous love triangle with 2 brothers. Passion, violence, and jealousy boiled over into a dramatic and scandalous climax. Selznick pushed the film's sensuality to the edge of what was acceptable, and it raised eyebrows across conservative America. Censors were furious, churches protested, and critics didn't know whether to call it art or exploitation. Despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, the film drew attention. But the story itself felt uneven. What began as a Western epic devolved into melodrama, with over-the-top performances and dialogue that made audiences uncomfortable. Gregory Peck, typically the noble hero, was cast wildly against type as a lecherous and cruel seducer. Jennifer Jones, Selznick's real-life lover, was given the spotlight in a role that seemed more like a personal obsession than a well-written character. Duel in the Sun did make money, but not nearly enough to justify its enormous cost. More importantly, it didn't earn the legacy Selznick had envisioned. Instead of becoming another Gone with the Wind, it became a symbol of excess, of a director so in love with his own vision that he lost sight of the story. Today, the film is remembered more for its controversy than its craft. It had the cast, the color, and the passion to be a classic. But Duel in the Sun tried too hard to burn bright and ended up crashing into the dust. The Last Sunset, 1961. The Last Sunset had all the ingredients for a Western classic. Released in 1961, it brought together 2 Hollywood powerhouses, Kirk Douglas and Rock Hudson, in a tense, emotionally charged frontier tale that promised grit, action, and psychological depth. With a screenplay penned by the legendary Dalton Trumbo and direction from Robert Aldrich, This wasn't just another cowboy shootout. It was intended to be a dark, brooding drama about love, redemption, and the scars of the past. On paper, it looked like a masterpiece in the making. Kirk Douglas played Brendan O'Malley, a poetic but morally ambiguous outlaw on the run, who shows up at the ranch of a former lover, only to find her married and her daughter all grown up. Meanwhile, Rock Hudson's character, Dana Stribling, a lawman with his own demons, is hunting O'Malley down. The two men agree to a temporary truce to drive a cattle herd to Texas, but tensions simmer as old secrets and new desires surface. As the journey unfolds, the film takes unexpected emotional turns. A slow-burning romance begins between O'Malley and the daughter of his former flame, only for a devastating revelation to turn the entire story upside down. It was bold, it was tragic, and it was a mess. Despite its ambitious setup, The Last Sunset couldn't quite pull it all together. The tone wavered between gritty realism and overwrought melodrama. The pacing dragged, the characters felt underdeveloped, and the powerful twist, meant to shock, ended up feeling uncomfortable and poorly handled. Critics weren't impressed, calling it unfocused and uneven. Audiences, expecting a rugged Western, were left puzzled by its tangled emotional arcs and awkward romantic tension. Even with the star power of Douglas and Hudson, the film failed to make a lasting impression at the box office. Over time, it became one of those forgotten mid-century westerns, ambitious but flawed, haunting but hollow. Today, The Last Sunset lives in that strange space between daring and disastrous. It aimed for emotional complexity and tragic grandeur, but like its doomed characters, it wandered too far into the sunset, never quite finding its way home. The Hallelujah Trail, 1965. When The Hallelujah Trail was released in 1965, it was supposed to be a breath of fresh air in the Western genre. Directed by John Sturges, the mastermind behind The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, the film boasted a star-studded cast, including Burt Lancaster, Lee Remick, and Donald Pleasance. With a massive budget and a sweeping widescreen format, it promised to deliver laughs, action, and satire, all wrapped in a grand Western spectacle. Audiences were ready for something bold and different. Set in the late 1800s, the plot revolves around a shipment of whiskey headed to Denver, just before the harsh winter hits. What should have been a simple delivery becomes a chaotic journey, as various groups try to control or stop the cargo. Temperance women want it destroyed. The cavalry is stuck keeping the peace. The miners just want their booze. And a Native American tribe, also caught in the madness, watches with amusement. It's part comedy, part Western, and part social satire, poking fun at everyone involved. But somewhere along the trail, things went wrong. Instead of being a sharp and witty parody, The Hallelujah Trail dragged on for nearly 2.5 hours, bloated with subplots and repetitive gags. The humor felt forced. The satire lacked bite. And despite the sweeping visuals and grand production, the film never found its rhythm. What was meant to be clever commentary ended up feeling like a never-ending sketch comedy that forgot its punchlines. Critics were lukewarm, calling it an overlong mess that didn't know if it wanted to be a Western, a farce, or a social statement. Audiences were even less forgiving. They expected laughs and adventure, but got a slow-moving circus of confused characters and diluted drama. The Hallelujah Trail had the cast, the budget, and the director to be something special. But in trying to be everything at once, funny, epic, and smart, it ended up being none of them. It wanted to blaze a new trail for Western comedies, but instead got lost in its own overstuffed ambition. The Left-Handed Gun, 1958. The Left-Handed Gun was meant to reinvent the legend of Billy the Kid, and in many ways it did. Released in 1958 and directed by Arthur Penn, the film took a bold, psychological approach to one of the Wild West's most infamous outlaws. This wasn't your father's Western. This was edgy, raw, and deeply introspective. And at the center of it all was Paul Newman, fresh off his rising stardom, portraying Billy not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a confused, volatile young man trapped by circumstance. The story follows Billy after the murder of his friend and mentor, John Tunstall. Grief-stricken and seething with rage, Billy begins a personal war against the men responsible. But this isn't a shoot-'em-up revenge tale. It's a deep dive into a fractured psyche. Billy is reckless, emotional, and increasingly unstable. He isn't a hero. He isn't a villain. He's a tragic figure desperately trying to make sense of a world that's already labeled him as doomed. The film broke away from traditional Western tropes. It was shot with a gritty realism, filled with moments of eerie silence, awkward pauses, and unsettling violence. It questioned the myths of the Old West and challenged the morality of vengeance. In many ways, it paved the way for the revisionist Westerns that would become popular years later. But in 1958, audiences didn't get it. Critics were divided. Some praised Newman's intense performance and the film's bold direction, but most were confused by its moodiness and unconventional tone. Audiences, expecting a classic outlaw story, were thrown off by its psychological depth and tragic undercurrents. It didn't make much noise at the box office, and the film quickly faded from public attention. It took years for The Left-Handed Gun to earn critical appreciation. Today, it's considered ahead of its time, a precursor to the darker, more complex westerns of the 60s and 70s. But back then, it was seen as a misfire, a film that dared to ask deeper questions in a genre still craving simple answers. The Left-Handed Gun tried to show the man behind the myth, and in doing so, it shot itself right out of the mainstream. Cimarron, 1931. When Cimarron was released in 1931, it wasn't just another Western. It was a cinematic event. Based on Edna Ferber's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, the film aimed to tell a sweeping, multi-generational story about the settling of the American frontier. RKO Pictures poured money into the production, constructing massive sets and recreating the chaotic Oklahoma land rush with hundreds of extras. It was epic in every sense, ambitious, grand, and deeply patriotic. And for a moment, it worked. Cimarron became the first Western to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. But the shine didn't last. The story follows Yancey Cravat, a bold and charismatic lawyer and newspaperman who drags his family to the Oklahoma Territory in search of a better future. He fights injustice, builds a town, and becomes a local hero. But his wanderlust, idealism, and restlessness slowly tear his family apart. Meanwhile, his wife Sabra is left behind to raise their children and run the newspaper, becoming the true backbone of the story. On the surface, Cimarron was a celebration of frontier spirit and progress. But under that layer of dust and determination lay a script that aged poorly, fast. Even by the standards of the 1930s, its racial stereotypes and patronizing portrayals of Native Americans and African Americans felt uncomfortable. What was once considered bold storytelling quickly became a relic of a narrow, outdated mindset. Despite its Oscar win, the film flopped at the box office. Its bloated runtime, uneven pacing, and overly preachy dialogue wore thin on audiences. The initial excitement turned into disappointment as viewers found it more exhausting than inspiring. Within a few years, Cimarron became one of the least rewatched Best Picture winners in history. Today, Cimarron is remembered more for what it represented than what it achieved. It was Hollywood's first big attempt to give the Western genre prestige and depth, but it did so with blind spots and heavy hands. It tried to tell the story of America's westward rise, but it ended up exposing just how flawed that dream could be when told through the wrong lens. The Alamo, 1960. The Alamo arrived in 1960 as one of the most ambitious Western epics ever attempted. Directed by and starring John Wayne, the film was a passion project that took years to come to life. John Wayne wanted to capture the heroic, patriotic spirit of the famous 1836 Battle of the Alamo, where a small band of Texan rebels stood defiantly against a vastly larger Mexican army. With a massive budget, sprawling battle scenes, and a cast filled with Hollywood legends, expectations were sky-high. The film opens with the rugged defenders, Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and William Travis, preparing for what would become a legendary last stand. The movie aims to honor their courage, sacrifice, and unyielding spirit, painting them as noble heroes fighting for freedom and independence. The sweeping cinematography, grand sets, and stirring score all contribute to a sense of epic grandeur. But despite these heroic intentions, The Alamo struggled to win over audiences and critics alike. The film's pacing was uneven. Long stretches of slow dialogue-heavy scenes weighed down the otherwise exciting battle sequences. While the film strove for historical accuracy, it often sacrificed character depth, resulting in stiff performances and a lack of emotional connection. Moreover, the film's glorification of the Texan cause rubbed some viewers the wrong way. Critics pointed out its simplistic portrayal of history, ignoring the complex political and cultural realities of the time. In an era when Westerns were beginning to question traditional heroism, The Alamo felt old-fashioned and one-dimensional. Box office returns were disappointing, and though it earned a few Oscar nominations, it failed to become the classic epic Wayne had hoped for. Instead, it became a symbol of Hollywood's struggle to balance spectacle with substance. Today, The Alamo is remembered as a well-crafted but flawed tribute, a film that aimed for greatness but got lost in its own legend, forever caught between history and Hollywood myth. The Proud Rebel, 1958. The Proud Rebel arrived in 1958 with high hopes of being a tender and gripping Western drama. Starring Alan Ladd, a box office star known for his tough yet sensitive screen presence, the film promised a unique blend of rugged frontier life and heartfelt emotion. It told the story of David, a war veteran struggling to care for his mute son in a hostile world. With its focus on family, hardship, and survival, The Proud Rebel aimed to stand apart from the shoot-'em-up westerns that dominated the era. Set against the sweeping plains and unforgiving landscapes of post-Civil War America, the film follows David's desperate journey to prove his son's innocence after the boy is accused of a crime. Along the way, David befriends a kind-hearted doctor and battles prejudices, both societal and personal. The relationship between father and son lies at the film's emotional core, providing a poignant counterpoint to the rough-and-tumble world around them. Despite its promising premise and Ladd's strong performance, The Proud Rebel struggled to find a wide audience. Critics appreciated the film's sincere attempt at drama and the tender portrayal of a father's love, but they also noted a slow pace and a somewhat predictable plot. The film's quiet tone and minimal action didn't quite meet the expectations of Western fans hungry for more excitement and gunfights. Commercially, it was a modest success, but fell short of being memorable. It never broke through to the level of classic status, often overshadowed by flashier westerns with bigger budgets and more star power. Still, it found a small, appreciative audience who valued its heartfelt storytelling and atmospheric cinematography. Today, The Proud Rebel remains a lesser-known gem, a western that took emotional risks, but ultimately got lost in the shuffle. It's a reminder that not every western needs to be about guns and glory. Some stories are about quiet strength and the unbreakable bond between father and son. The Conqueror, 1956. The Conqueror was poised to be a grand Hollywood spectacle, an epic retelling of the rise of Genghis Khan, one of history's most powerful and ruthless conquerors. With a colossal budget and a cast boasting John Wayne in the lead role, along with Susan Hayward and Agnes Moorehead, the film promised to deliver drama, action, and exotic adventure on an unprecedented scale. Hollywood believed they had the next big historical epic. But from the start, The Conqueror struggled under the weight of its own ambition. John Wayne, an icon of American westerns, was cast as the Mongol warlord, a choice that baffled many critics and audiences. His thick American accent and towering presence clashed with the character's Asian heritage, making the casting feel awkward and distracting. The film's attempts at authenticity were further undermined by its shooting location, near nuclear test sites in Utah, a fact that would later fuel tragic, real-life consequences for the cast and crew. The plot traces Temujin's rise from humble beginnings to his unstoppable conquests, mixing history with Hollywood spectacle. While the film featured massive battle scenes and lavish costumes, the story itself felt shallow and uneven. Dialogue was often stilted, pacing dragged, and the emotional stakes rarely landed. Instead of an inspiring epic, the film came off as a mismatched, confused production trying to do too much without the right foundation. Critics were harsh. The film was widely mocked for its miscasting and lack of coherence. audiences stayed away, making The Conqueror a financial disaster. Over time, it earned a reputation as one of the biggest flops in Hollywood history, often cited as an example of how star power alone can't save a film. Tragically, the film is also remembered for the health issues many involved later faced, likely due to radiation exposure during filming. The Conqueror serves as a cautionary tale. Even with all the resources and fame in the world, filmmaking is a delicate balance. Hollywood's grand ambitions crashed hard with this epic misfire.